Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first session today for empowering yourself through conflict. My name is Ayesha Adhami-Magueta, and I am principal at the Purposeful Path. And I am joined by my friend and colleague, Shannon O'Neill. Shannon, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
My name's Shannon O'Neill. I'm a family mediator and I've worked in community mental health. My focus has been how conflict impacts relationships in workplaces, families, and in mental health.
Very good, thank you. And I bring organizational capacity building, working through conflict in teams, leading through conflict, and also as a coach, helping people personally deal with interpersonal conflict in relationships and families and so on. So we are going to be talking about a number of different topics throughout the next few months. We're going to have this monthly session on empowering yourself through conflict. Today's session is called Conflict 101. So let's get started. If you have any comments or questions, please drop them in the comments underneath the video, and we will get to them hopefully next week in our next session. So Shannon, tell us a little bit about, first of all, we're going to start, I think, talking about the different and just a little bit.
Yeah, like to explore conflict and understand. I mean, it's kind of a juicy topic, right? I mean, we all, every single TV show, every single movie, what grabs you in is the conflict. Um, so watching it is fantastic. Being in it is something entirely different. So
Absolutely.
there are four different types of conflict. There's identity-based conflict, values conflict, cognition conflict, and interest-based conflict. This is just a quick overview. We're going to get into this more over the next few months. But, essentially, identity-based conflict is when you feel that somebody is threatening some part of your identity that's important to you. So let's say you value being reliable and somebody's saying you're lazy. You'd be defensive. You'd feel defensive in that. A values-based conflict is competing values, competing ethics. So let's say you're valuing being a really good friend, and then also you're also value telling the truth. And if those two come into conflict with each other, um, that would be a values-based conflict. Cognition conflict. These are the ones that I find the most difficult, to be honest, because it has to do with how somebody recollects an experience. So it would sound something like, "You're wrong. That's not what happened. I didn't say that. You said that. No, I didn't say that. You said that." And then the last is the interest-based conflict, which has to do with resources. And this is where we get the scarcity arguments that you and I were talking about a little bit earlier.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of different elements to each of those types of conflict. And it also sounds like there could potentially be overlap in any situation. You might have something where there's an identity conflict, but also a cognition conflict at the same time.
It's very rarely one thing.
Mm, right.
Yeah.
It's there's always some kind of overlap between the different types of
Yeah.
conflict and different
Yeah. There's
elements that are happening. Yeah.
two or more.
Yeah, and I think especially in the cognition side where people, uh what is it they say? They say that there's your side, there's the other person's side, and then there's the right side. Like we don't remember everything exactly how it happens. A lot of it comes through our own filters. So when we're coming to conflict, what do you what do you see as each person's responsibility uh when entering kind of like a space where there potentially could be a conflict, or let's call it, a difficult conversation? Because uh, when we talk about conflict in the context that we are in this session, we're not talking about situations that are a threat to your safety. We're not talking about something where you have to be worried about being harmed or, you need protection. That's a different animal. So we're really talking here about how to navigate difficult conversations, things that seem unresolvable in a healthy and a peaceful kind of way. So tell us a little bit about what you think would be the the responsibilities that each person brings to this kind of a difficult conversation.
I mean, ultimately, the responsibility falls on you. Like my responsibility in any conflict is my own self-awareness and my own emotional intelligence about how I'm feeling in that moment. And I have to understand that first, the feelings that I'm experiencing, before I can understand what type of conflict I'm in, and before I can figure out how do I want to approach this in a good faith way. Good faith meaning that I'm open to hearing the other person's perspective, that I'm able to communicate mine, and that my focus is resolution. I want to work this out with you. I want to figure this out. In that, though, there's also the responsibility of being very honest about what you need, how you're feeling, because your perspective matters just as much as the other person's perspective. And oftentimes, when we're in conflict, we feel that one perspective, if I accept your perspective, that means that negates mine.
Mm.
And so we're in that battle of like, no, mine, mine, mine. And I just, in conflict resolution, it's about there is space for both or all perspectives, depending on how many people are in this conflict. And in fact, by making that space, you get a much more creative resolution and also a much better understanding of yourself, of your relationships, of everybody's needs. And it brings people closer together.
Mm. And I think that it's a really important piece in terms of, as you say, us being responsible for ourselves, is to make the choice, to know that we have the choice to disrupt reactivity, or we have the choice to respond differently to something that we've heard many, many times, right? And it's being able to give ourselves that grace to say, you know what, I've tried this many times in different ways. And if this doesn't work, instead of kind of convincing ourselves that this is the only way that we can do something, it has to be this way, that we can validate ourselves making different choices, but also being able to validate the other person. And when there's conflict, that is challenging your identity or challenging your perspective, how can we be validating to other people and not feel like we're negating our own position? What is some of the language that we might use to be able to do that?
Interesting. Language is so, I mean, language is important in everything. It's
Of
especially
course, yeah.
important
Yeah.
in conflict.
Mhm.
Um, you know, big language words that put people up into defensive positions are words like never, always, you always do this, you never take out the trash, you never help me around the house, you always call me lazy. Like those words are typically inflammatory and bring out the defensiveness of
Yeah,
somebody else
that's
because
right.
there is no never or always, right?
Mm.
Um, the when you were talking earlier too, when you were saying the choices, I think that conflict feels polarizing in the moment. It feels like either I'm going to win or you're going to win, and I'm going to defend my position. And whether that's in your fight mode, your freeze mode, your whether you're avoiding, those are all ways to kind of get out of the conflict and self-protect. Doesn't make the conflict resolve, but
Yeah.
it does protect. And I think if we can if we can take kind of the theoretical stance that most conflict is perception based, I'm perceiving you to be saying these things. I'm perceiving that I'm like, if we go to an interest based conflict, I'm perceiving that there's a scarcity of resource. I'm perceiving that if I don't get this and you get it, you will survive and I will not.
Mm.
There are so many options in between forever and always. And that is where conflict resolution exists, is that
Yeah.
space between those polarized perspectives.
Yeah. And it can be, I think that it can be hard for people to feel like that is an option for them. They may feel like, even if I show up in a good way, that the other person is not going to be responding in a good faith kind of situation. And if there are recurring patterns, recurring language, recurring, because uh, even the best laid plans of someone to handle something with compassion or to approach it with more of an open mind can be, can be sabotaged when they find themselves drawn into a pattern or a conflict that just keeps going round and round, right? So when we're in that mindset, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind from a coaching perspective. I would say one is that the compassion piece isn't just about being compassionate to other people. It's about being compassionate to ourselves. Nobody got the playbook. Nobody got the golden rules of this is how we're going to resolve things and this is how we're going to live happily ever after. That's just not realistic. So we are kind of flying a little bit by the seat of our pants. We are kind of forging new ways of talking to each other. Some things will work, some things won't work, but it's about being curious and it's about
Mhm.
wanting to try. And then committing to that practice is that, even if something doesn't go well the first time, the second time, the third time, if you're committed to making sure that you are going to keep shifting on your own, then that situation has to shift because you're shifting. Even if it doesn't feel that way right then, you keep shifting and that situation is also going to shift. So having that compassion, having that commitment, knowing that, I have a choice, I'm able to do this and I'm able to do it differently, I think is key. And also giving ourselves that grace that not everything is going to work out the first time we try it.
And it's going into conflict and wanting, we mostly want to make changes when the way that we are doing things no longer serves us in our
Mm,
relationships and for ourselves, that we don't like the way that we feel. And it's not, the change isn't about the other person at all. It's
hmm
about us. And just because in the moment it doesn't feel that perhaps there's been change in the relationship or in the way that, we typically, let's say you and I fight over or argue about who does more work around the house, right? Some benign thing that's not benign for anybody that thinks about house chores. And um and I decide, you know what? I'm kind of sick of this dance that I'm in with you. I don't want to do this dance with you anymore. And so I decide that I'm going to take a different approach of having the conversation with you. And the thing is you're not privy to my internal dialogue or my internal thoughts. And so when I change something, you perhaps are going to be a little confused by it and say, wait a second, I'm used to this dance. And you're going to try to do those same steps again because it's so familiar. So just because it doesn't feel like it's successful in the moment doesn't mean that it hasn't impacted the other person in some way, and they're going to reflect on it. And perhaps when we're in the conversation again, you've planted a seed, and that seed will grow.
I love that. I love that. And I think that that's really important because I often say to my clients and to myself, because sometimes I need to hear the same thing, which is that it's not one conversation that
Not one comment.
changes things. You're having one conversation in a series of conversations, and that's where the change happens. And surprisingly, sometimes the change isn't it isn't, like you said, it's not the change in the other person. It's the change in us. It's how we're perceiving it or how we're engaging it or how we're approaching it that actually starts making the shift that other people can also follow. Because in the same way that we didn't get the playbook, other people didn't get the playbook either, right? And how many of us, are kind of still responding from what we learned as children about how to
All of us,
engage people, right?
all of us
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
The way we respond in conflict is established by the time we're three.
Yeah. hmm
Whatever we've been modeled from however we've witnessed conflict exist and manifest, is it's still there. We every single time that we engage in difficult conversations or conflict in Canada, we kind of say dispute more than conflict, but um, we are those 3-year-old versions of ourselves showing up in those moments. It takes a lot of practice, and you were talking about this earlier, and preparation in
Yes.
order to undo that well-rehearsed dance in our conversation. And the other piece of this is like I think that we take for granted that communication doesn't we take for granted that other people should just know. You should just know that this is
Hmm.
important to me. You
Yeah.
should just know that I don't like this.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. Like, it is our responsibility to be good communicators and compassionate communicators about what our needs are.
Yeah. And coming back to this idea of good faith conversation, let's talk a little bit about what is the behavior and language that indicates a good faith engagement, and what is the behavior and the language that doesn't do that. So I know for me in workplaces, when when someone you're approaching someone, you're talking to someone, and they are not willing to take any steps to resolve the situation, or they're dismissive about your concerns, or they kind of say, well, there isn't anything that I could do, so you're going to have to handle it. Right.
Mhm.
Those are not good faith conversations. That's not someone who is willing to support a good outcome. So when you see that language, how do you make a decision about, can I engage this person in a good faith conversation because I know they're committed to the result? What, how do we know? How can we see? What are some other things that are said or done that indicate good faith or not good faith?
I mean, it's such a spectrum. So I would say really not good faith is you are, insert name, right? Name call, right? You
Yeah.
are this.
Mhm.
This is your fault. You are responsible for this. Um, and then the good faith is more I statements. I'm having a really hard time with this. I'm not sure what to do. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need you to help me figure this out, would be the
Right.
good. In between, the more kind of practiced and the more empowered you are in those difficult conversations when you're being met with, and again, like you've highlighted this, we're not talking about conversations where you feel threatened or your safety feels threatened. But if you're noticing a defensiveness come up, and
Mhm.
defensiveness could sound like blame and criticism, this is your fault. The more skilled you are in that, you can really create an environment where the other person feels safe in having the difficult conversation with you. Because not, as again, as you were saying, not everybody's been modeled how to get through these difficult conversations in an effective way. And so if you start practicing and you start really learning how to do it, you can also model to somebody else that it is possible to have these difficult conversations and resolve them in a way that meets everybody's needs. Um, so, just because somebody starts off in a seemingly or perceived non-good faith stance doesn't mean that they are not capable and have the capacity to have a good faith conversation.
Yeah. I think that that's the thing about the self-awareness piece, is that if we are able to identify the language and the behavior that
Yes.
is not in good faith, but advocate for ourselves in that moment. So when you said earlier that the language people use, like you are or you're responsible for, it can also be cushioned in a very different way. When you're trying to get your needs met, if you're in a conflict situation, you're approaching, let's say, a manager or someone for support in the workplace, and they say, well, you're really good at this. You should be able to find a solution, or something like that. Sometimes it's cushioned in a way that is deflective and that doesn't meet your needs. And it's really important there to not get caught up in that language that is putting it back on you, to be able to say, I appreciate that you have confidence in me, or that you trust me. This is something that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. I do
Mhm.
need the support. And so what can you offer me to do that? So it's not necessarily being directly confrontational and saying, listen, don't give me lip service, do something about this. But sometimes there's also a place for that, because it really is, we want to validate our own experience and how we're coming to things. Sometimes we can do it in a way that's a little bit gentler, and sometimes we need to do it in a way that's a little bit more assertive. And everything is valid. It's all valid how we're responding, right? It's just making the choice. How are
Yeah, it's
we
all
how are we choosing to do it, right? And recognizing where we need to push a little harder and where we need to get that support as well. So we'll be talking more about um, tools of dealing with conflict, more self-awareness, the language, the behavior, not just recognizing in other people, recognizing it in ourselves, and making different choices when we come back for our continuing series on empowering yourself through conflict. So as we're wrapping up today's session, uh, Shannon, what are some of the takeaways that you would like people to have for today?
the goal is to have good faith when in difficult conversations. And that even in those moments where it's either you're going to win or I'm going to win, or that feeling of one of us is walking away a winner and one of us is walking away like the loser, um, remember that somebody else's perspective does not negate yours, and vice versa. Um, the third piece is our perception of and the more certain we are of how we see things in that moment, that is when we need to take a deep breath and understand that we don't necessarily see things as they are in those high emotional places, because if we didn't have high emotions, there wouldn't be conflict. So our high emotions are flooding our perception. And so really, really check your perception of the conflict. And we'll give skills and tools on how to, and especially you will be giving skills and tools on how to do that in the moment and or afterwards, which is
Yeah,
probably how we start as we
yeah,
start out.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
language,
and
and language.
language. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love all that you've shared. And I think that, what's really important from a coaching takeaway is the idea of having that compassion for yourself, having that compassion for other people. Sometimes, if you can't get to compassion, try and get to neutrality. Just try
Hmm.
and be neutral. If
Hmm.
you can, because you're the desire is, I don't want to be upset about this, and I want to rise above it, and I want to be, I want to be able to engage this in a compassionate way. But sometimes the reality is that our emotions are much too high. We can't get from anger to compassion quickly. And depending on the pattern, depending on the reactivity, it's going to take time. So make those small little steps to go from being angry to being less angry, to being a little less angry, to being neutral, to being able to be curious, to being able to hear something. Like it's all a process. So just take those little steps. And as Shannon said, it's practice makes permanent. Prepare yourself. You know you're going to hear this stuff. How can you engage it differently? Make the commitment. Second of all, make that commitment that you are going to continue even if things don't work out. You're going to continue on this path so that you can get there. It's not one conversation, it's a series of conversations that's going to get there. And then finally, piggybacking on what you said, I would say the last thing is that give yourself the grace to course correct at any
Hmm.
given moment. I have
Hmm.
had conversations where I can hear that I'm being reactive about something, And I stop myself. I say, just a minute, hold on. That's not what I mean to say.
Mhm.
What I mean to say is this, and sometimes it doesn't come out the best way. My emotions and my words are all jumbled up, and I don't, I'm not necessarily expressing it exactly the way that I think I'd like to perfectly express it. But at least I've indicated that that's not what I meant, and I mean something different, and my intention is something different. And that's also a good place to ask a question. It's also a good place to
Yeah,
ask a question,
yeah.
right? If you're in that reactive space and something is happening, it's to say, just a second, I just need to get my bearings again. Is there a different way that we can do this? Is there some other way that we can approach this? Or ask the other person, do you really think that this is the only way that we can work through this? Like, connect on that human level as much as you can, and keep talking, keep having those conversations, but give yourself that grace to have a pause. It could be a minute, it could be a second. You know what? I can't have this conversation right now, but can I come back to you tomorrow? Do you have time tomorrow? Can we come back to it? Because giving that
That's the
grace
important.
to yourself and to the other person gives you that space. It helps you to make that choice. It gives you the space to make that choice.
Hmm. Hmm. I
Yeah,
mean, just because ultimately, when we are overwhelmed with our own emotional experience, it's physiologically impossible to problem solve.
right.
So it is our responsibility to take that time to get ourselves more grounded in an effort to work towards exactly what you said, the commitment to problem solve.
Absolutely. Yeah. This has been great. Shannon, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us today. We are coming back. It is the last Monday of every month. We will be continuing the series on empowering yourself through conflict. If you have any questions, you have any comments, anything you'd like us to cover in any of our sessions, just drop them in the comments below. Our next session will be on conflict through competing priorities, something that is applicable in the workplace and personal relationships, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some valuable tools and insights that you can use in your own practice as well. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Shannon. We'll see you again next month, last Monday of every month, 10 o'clock, for the next session on empowering yourself through conflict. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.